"Why aren't you speaking to me?" I asked, puzzled by the sudden silence. "I've chosen not to engage with strangers," came the reply. Accepting this response, I prepared to leave. Life at my husband's parents' house had been challenging, and while I anticipated some resistance from my mother-in-law, the cold shoulder from my father-in-law was unexpected. The atmosphere shifted dramatically when my sister-in-law, who openly disliked me, moved back in, turning our once serene household into a battleground. Feeling undeterred, I muttered, "Don't assume I'll regret leaving," and swiftly packed my belongings. Just 2 days after I departed, chaos erupted in their home. My husband and I initially met at work, where he was a sales representative frequently visiting my office. As we collaborated more, I found myself drawn to his kindness and charm. While he may not have been conventionally attractive, his personality won me over, and it wasn't long before we started dating. During our conversations, he revealed that he grew up in a stable family with loving parents and a sister. My background was starkly different. I had lost my parents at a young age and was raised in an orphanage. Discussing my past was difficult, but he listened empathetically and reassured me of his unwavering support. It wasn't long before he proposed, eager to take our relationship to the next level. When I met his parents and shared my upbringing, they were supportive, dismissing any notion that it would impact our marriage. This acceptance warmed my heart, though my sister-in-law's reaction suggested she was less pleased. At the time, I brushed off her surprise, attributing it to the adjustments of our growing relationship. As our wedding approached, my husband and I considered living with his parents. Although it was a serious thought, I chose to maintain my job, especially since he was due for a transfer. This decision, though small, marked the beginning of many choices I would navigate in my new life as part of their family. Despite considering leaving my job to move with my husband, my career was on an upward trajectory, and I had recently been entrusted with more responsibilities. After discussing it, we agreed that he would relocate alone following our wedding. I relished the idea of enjoying our early days as newlyweds, even planning long weekend visits to ensure we had quality time together. Moving in with my in-laws right after marrying felt overwhelming, but my husband seemed more at ease with the arrangement, likely hoping it would alleviate his mother's concerns. Given my background, the prospect of being part of a family was appealing, and over time, I had grown fond of my in-laws despite the challenges of balancing work and family life. One day, an unexpected situation arose that tested our otherwise content living arrangement. It began when my usually bossy and anxious mother-in-law was out shopping, and I was preparing to clean on my day off. My father-in-law, appearing more frazzled than usual, pulled me aside for a private conversation. "What's going on?" I inquired, noticing his discomfort. He hesitated before sharing his dilemma. "I need to take some time off work," he confessed, his voice heavy with exhaustion. He explained how workplace stress and his declining health were taking a toll on him. What worried him most, though, was how my mother-in-law would react. She was generally caring but prone to anxiety and could be overly critical. In the past, when he had taken a sick day, she had chastised him for not being as career-focused as his coworkers. My father-in-law had always been slender, but lately I noticed he had lost even more weight. Despite needing a break, he feared his wife's reaction, especially since they relied heavily on the extra income from his overtime hours. Reluctantly, he revealed that he had been secretly seeing a doctor, but now he was facing the reality that he needed a longer break from work. "If I tell her, she might leave me," he admitted, his voice tinged with desperation. The thought saddened me. My in-laws had welcomed me with open arms, despite my difficult past growing up in an orphanage. I felt a strong sense of duty to support them in return. "Okay," I said gently, "I'll send you money every month to help cover the expenses." I was determined to ease his burden. "I'm sorry you're going through this. Focus on getting better and return to work when you're ready." His shoulders relaxed with visible relief. "Thank you so much," he replied, though the weight of the secret he had to keep was still apparent in his expression. After our conversation, he continued to maintain the charade of going to work each day, hiding the truth from my mother-in-law to avoid upsetting her. This secret added a complex layer to our family dynamics, but I was committed to supporting him through this challenging time. While I quietly transferred money into my father-in-law's bank account to cover his living expenses, my mother-in-law never bothered to check her bank statements closely, so she remained unaware of the arrangement. My father-in-law continued the pretense of going to work each day, but in reality, he sought solace and recovery at a mental health clinic and found peace during long walks in the serene mountains. Gradually, his health and spirits improved, and it seemed he might soon be ready to return to work. However, an unexpected event disrupted the fragile balance in our household. After a heated argument with her husband, my sister-in-law returned to her parents' home. "There's nothing like being back home," she declared with obvious relief, venting about her strained marriage. "I thought I'd lose my mind staying with that foolish husband of mine. I'll be staying here for a while, so you'll need to cook for me too." From the first family gathering, it was clear she harbored resentment toward me. At her wedding, she grimaced throughout the event and later criticized my appearance to my face, insinuating her brother could have married someone more attractive. She also made cruel comments about my upbringing in an orphanage, openly calling it an embarrassment. When she had initially moved out after her marriage, I assumed her presence in my life wouldn't be a permanent concern. However, her sudden return due to marital problems seemed anything but temporary. Her stay extended longer than anticipated, and her attitude grew increasingly bitter, especially toward my father-in-law. Despite this, my mother-in-law had always treated me kindly, and I believed she would defend me against any harsh words from my sister-in-law. Unfortunately, I was wrong. One day, after returning home from work, I sensed a shift in my mother-in-law's demeanor. She had grown distant and cold, her warmth replaced by an unsettling chill. Worried, I approached her cautiously. "Is something bothering you?" I asked gently. Her response was sharp, catching me off guard. "Did you know you've been talking about me behind my back?" I was stunned. "I've never spoken ill of you. You've always been kind, and I'm grateful. Why would I say bad things about you?" I replied, confused and hurt. She left the room abruptly without another word, leaving me standing there, trying to process the accusation. In the hallway, my sister-in-law stood with a smirk on her face. "Looks like you're not in her good books anymore. Did your true colors finally show? Being from an orphanage, your background does matter, huh? It's best not to gossip about people," she taunted. I haven't said anything bad about her. I defended myself, bewildered by the whole situation. "Oh, the neighbors mentioned it when I came back," she said with a smug grin. "They said you've been speaking poorly of her all along." "That's not true. I've never said any of those things." "Stop making things up," I protested, but my words fell on deaf ears. Feigning innocence, she raised her voice. "Oh, how disrespectful. Mom, she's calling me a liar and being mean to me," my sister-in-law exclaimed as she hurried back into my mother-in-law's room, twisting my words. After that incident, her behavior only worsened. She began fabricating stories about how I mistreated her, claiming I forced her to sleep in the hallway and demanded she take the last turn for a bath because she was merely a guest. Each time she complained, I found myself defending my actions, trying to clear the misunderstandings that had started to poison the house. The home that had once promised a fresh start and a new family now felt cold and tense. With each passing day, my mother-in-law seemed more influenced by my sister-in-law's manipulative words, and the atmosphere grew more hostile. I couldn't help but wonder if my sister-in-law intended to make her stay permanent, a thought that weighed heavily on me every day as I returned from work. When I arrived home that evening, the house felt colder than ever. "I'm back," I called softly, but no one responded. The living room was eerily quiet, the warm greetings of the past replaced by a deafening silence. I sighed and made my way to the kitchen. "I'll start making dinner," I murmured to myself, trying to push aside the growing feeling of isolation. "I'll get dinner ready," I said, trying to keep the routine normal. But as I walked into the dining area, I was surprised to find my mother-in-law, father-in-law, and sister-in-law already seated, eating sushi together. My sister-in-law smirked when she saw me. "Oh, look who's here. Someone who isn't family. You weren't planning on having sushi, were you?" My mother-in-law kept her eyes glued to the television, ignoring my presence entirely. Trying to mask my hurt, I replied, "If you wanted sushi, you should have told me. I came straight home from shopping." No one said anything about wanting sushi. My sister-in-law shot back dismissively, then turned to her parents with a cheerful tone. "Hey, Mom, Dad, I went out with my friends today and brought back some delicious pudding. Let's eat it together." They indulged in the dessert, continuing to ignore me. Exhausted from work and emotionally drained, I retreated to my room, too weary to confront their blatant exclusion. The following day, my sister-in-law was getting ready for another outing with friends. "Can you drive me to the station?" she asked casually. I can't. It's a weekday and I have work, I said, my patience wearing thin. Besides, we're not even going in the same direction and you want to leave around noon. She pouted, trying to manipulate me. Just take the day off. It's fine. Your cute little sis-in-law just wants a ride. She hasn't had a chance to relax since she got married, right? Can't you be a little nicer to her? With all due respect, didn't you go out with friends last night? It seems like you've been going out almost every day since you came back, I countered, refusing to give in. Have work. Please take the bus or the train. She huffed, whispering something to my mother-in-law as I left for work, determined not to let the situation escalate any further. But that evening, the tipping point came. Work had delayed me, and I arrived home late, soaked from the rain, groceries in hand. As I stepped inside, I braced myself for yet another cold reception. Sure enough, they were eating dinner without acknowledging me, continuing the pattern of the last few days. But what awaited me in the courtyard was far worse than their cold shoulders. Under the dim porch light, I saw a pile of my belongings, scattered in the middle of the garden. My designer bag, bought with my first paycheck, shoes that were a birthday gift from my husband, even my work computer, all drenched from the rain. My sister-in-law stood nearby, smirking triumphantly. Having a stranger's things in the house grosses me out, so I threw them out, she sneered. Flaunting a designer bag like that. How arrogant of you. I stood there, stunned, rain pouring down around me as I tried to process the cruelty of what she had done. I turned to my mother-in-law and father-in-law, my voice trembling. Why didn't you stop her? Have I done something to make you believe her lies about me bad-mouthing you and bullying her? Aren't you upset with her for what she did? I pleaded, desperate for some sign of support. My mother-in-law wouldn't meet my gaze, her eyes fixed on the floor. After a long, uncomfortable silence, she finally muttered, I can't talk to strangers. I can't be friendly with someone who's not family. The words hit me like a slap. Where's my father-in-law? I asked, my voice growing quieter. He had been the one I'd supported during his time off, the only one who had seemed to appreciate my efforts to fit into this family. But as the silence stretched on, the harsh reality of my situation became painfully clear. I had taken on managing the household finances, grateful for being welcomed into the family. But now, when conflict arose, I found myself longing for some support, especially from my father-in-law, whom I had helped when he was struggling. As tensions escalated, I hoped he would stand by me, but instead, he silently walked past me and retreated to his room without a word. That's it for me, I whispered to myself, a mix of resignation and resolve settling in. My sister-in-law, sensing an opportunity to twist the knife, sneered, Oh, are you upset? I'm sorry, not really. I never liked you from the start, you know, coming from an institution and all. Just don't regret leaving. Good riddance, I retorted sharply, the decision crystal clear now. It was time to leave. I quickly packed my belongings, feeling the weight of the realization that even though my father-in-law might worry about losing my financial support, he hadn't made any move to stop me or defend me. His silence was the final straw. Driven by the need to escape this toxic environment, I didn't even bother discussing the issues with my husband before leaving. A nagging suspicion crept into my mind. Perhaps my mother-in-law hadn't told him about his sister's return or the conflicts that followed. If he had known, surely he would have reached out, knowing how strained relations were between us. But there had been no word from him, and a part of me feared that perhaps he, too, had been influenced by his family's narrative. With a heavy heart, I got into my car and drove straight to my husband's new job location, far away from this suffocating place. As I drove, doubts clouded my mind about his loyalty, about our future together. Maybe, just maybe, he had already chosen his side. I feared that divorce might be the only solution. Upon arriving at his apartment, I found it empty. He was likely still at work, caught up in end-of-month tasks. As I sat in the dimly lit living room, the door clicked open, and soon my husband walked in. His face lit up with surprise and delight. What? You're here. You should have told me you were coming. I would have come back sooner. What a pleasant surprise. His warm smile was a stark contrast to the coldness I had endured at his family's home. Relief washed over me, but so did the humiliation I had been bottling up for weeks. I couldn't hold back the tears. What's wrong? Did I do something? Seriously, what's going on? He asked, his concern evident. Taking a deep breath, I began to tell him everything. I explained how I had supported his father during his medical leave, how his sister had returned and overstayed her welcome, and how her lies had turned his mother against me. I described the cold treatment I received, and how things escalated to the point where my belongings were thrown out into the rain. Through tears and pauses, I revealed the painful reality of my time with his family. After listening to it all, my husband was visibly shaken. He apologized profusely, regretting how he had been too consumed by work to notice the signs. He was deeply sorry for his family's behavior and assured me that I would never have to return to that house or deal with them again if I didn't want to. His response gave me a glimmer of hope that perhaps, with his support, we could face this storm together. While I couldn't yet imagine forgiving his family, my husband was resolute. He was determined to sever ties with his parents and sister, declaring that he would also stop providing financial support to his father. That night, for the first time in what felt like ages, I felt the massive burden lift from my shoulders. The stress and heartache I had carried dissolved, and I slept soundly beside him. I never returned to my in-laws' house. Commuting to my husband's remote work location wasn't feasible, but fortunately, I had already arranged with my company to work from home. My job didn't require me to be in the office regularly, and many of my colleagues were also working remotely. Though I still had to visit the office a few times a month, some of my coworkers lived even farther away, so remote work had become a well-established norm. Living with my in-laws and enduring my sister-in-law's antagonism had kept me from truly enjoying married life. But now, as we settled into this new chapter, it felt like we were finally beginning our lives together as newlyweds. I was setting up my remote workstation when, unexpectedly, my sister-in-law called. She sounded agitated. The day after I left, it was my father-in-law's payday, a day my mother-in-law usually handled by transferring part of his paycheck into their household account. This time, however, she couldn't do it. Only then did they realize that I had been financially supporting them during his time off. "Why didn't you tell me you were covering the living expenses?" she demanded over the phone. "He asked me not to," I calmly replied. "He didn't want you to know, and I respected his wishes. We're running out of money, and there's no one here to cook or do the laundry. The house is a mess. As his wife, you need to come back and take care of everything, and send money." "How heartless can you be?" she exclaimed. "I've already told you, I'm not coming back to that house, nor will I be treated like your maid," I replied, my voice steady. "Why should I help people who despise me, ruin my belongings, and treat me so poorly?" "But aren't you his wife? Without your help, we can't pay the bills or even buy groceries," she persisted, her tone growing desperate. "That's exactly why it's not my concern. I'm an outsider, remember? So it's none of my business," I said, echoing her earlier words to me before hanging up, ignoring her further complaints. Despite their numerous calls and messages, I stood firm. No longer would I be manipulated by guilt or pulled back into their chaos. This was a liberating moment for me, solidifying my resolve to build a new life with my husband, free from the toxic ties that had once held me back. When my husband returned from work that evening, finally answered their calls, he was resolute. "I will never forgive you for how you treated her. She's not coming back, and neither am I. I don't see you as my family anymore. Leave my wife alone, or you'll regret it." Considering how much my sister-in-law idolized her brother and how dependent my mother-in-law had been on him, his declaration must have shocked them deeply. A few days later, my father-in-law called, his voice thick with desperation. He explained how unbearable life had become with my mother-in-law and sister-in-law and pleaded with me to resume the financial support. Although they had initially welcomed me into their family, despite my background, their failure to support me when I needed it most was unforgivable. I owed them nothing. "I will never assist you again," I told him, and ended the call. In an act of sheer desperation, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law showed up at my workplace, hoping to cause a scene. Anticipating their behavior, I had already informed my company of the situation, and security was on high alert. They caused a commotion, demanding that the company force me to send money back to their household. When my husband found out, he was livid. He advised me to report them to the police. My colleagues were incredibly supportive, encouraging me to stay focused on my life and work, far removed from the toxic environment of my in-laws. The stress, however, took a heavy toll on my father-in-law, whose health declined rapidly under the pressure from my mother-in-law and sister-in-law. Eventually, he had no choice but to quit his job. Meanwhile, my sister-in-law attempted to return to her husband's family, but they refused to take her back. Word of her dramatic outbursts at my workplace spread quickly, further damaging her already troubled marriage, which soon led to divorce. With no support, my in-laws and sister-in-law moved into a modest apartment and took on part-time jobs to make ends meet. As for my husband and me, we were finally enjoying peaceful, fulfilling days together. Our home had become a sanctuary of love and support, far from the strife we had endured. Recently, we received wonderful news. We are expecting a child. The anticipation of meeting our baby fills us with joy, and we cherish every moment of this special time together.